yourselves before we start the discussion. So, my name is Pavlos Tyrologou. I am the External Relations Officer for the European Federation of Geologists. Some of you know me. I'm an engineering geologist by background. I have a PhD in environmental geotechnical engineering, and on my everyday life I'm working with environmental issues and energy specifically related to hydrogen and hydrogen storage. I will pass the floor now to Rudi Ruggeri. So Rudi, here you are. Can you shortly introduce yourself?
Yeah, very quickly, everyone knows me. By the way, Rudi Ruggeri, part of the Consiglio Nazionale di Geology. I'm delegate from CNG into EFG, based in Milan, in geology, and with over 30 years of environmental engineering consulting experience, more in environmental stuff. Part of this group since 3 years, so it's very nice to be here and leading this panel with Pavlos. So Maria, you want to introduce yourself?
Hello everybody, I'm Maria Zima. I'm the president of Association of Greek Geologists. I'm very happy to be here today.
The next of our speakers will be also Professor Yannis Maniatis, which has been also Minister of Energy back in the Greek Parliament some years ago. So we are very honored to have also with us. So Professor, if you can briefly introduce yourself.
Thank you very much for inviting me in this meeting. First of all, I am a rural and surveying engineer, so I belong to the greater family of geoscientists, and this is my main attribute. A professor at the University of Thessaloniki, of Piraeus, and former minister, and now member of the European Parliament, member of the ITRE committee, which has to do with energy, industry, and research.
On my left, it's Ion Kodesco. I think you might pronounce your name quite well. If you could briefly introduce yourself.
Sure. Well, I'm Ion Kodesco. I'm the head of the Land Use and Management unit in DG Environment in the European Commission. And thank you for the invitation. I'm here especially from the perspective and also interest of soils. As you know, the Commission put on the table a proposal for a directive on soil monitoring and resilience, and of course, geology is of much interest for it, and vice versa. Thank you again.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity to have you with us. Can I ask also the next speaker to introduce herself? Natasha Stephen, please.
Thank you. I'm Natasha Stephen. I'm the Director of Science Engagement at the Geological Society of London, which means that I oversee a lot of our different departments, including our science, our education, and our policy work. I am a geoscientist by training. I'm actually a planetary geoscientitist, so I've got a lot of expertise on other worlds other than our own, but Earth is a planet, so of course we include that as well. And thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. Can I ask the last one, Monica Souza, also to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Pavlos. Good afternoon to everybody. I'm Monica Souza. I'm from the Portuguese Association of Geologists. I'm the Executive Director and Delegate of APG to EFG. I'm also the coordinator of the EFG panel of experts on geological heritage, and I am a geologist. I have a PhD in geosciences. So thank you for having me here.
It's our pleasure. So we will start with the first questions. Again, this is not an interrogation, so please, I will ask all the panelists to be relaxed, to enjoy this family feeling that we are so proud within the EFG, warm feeling. So Rudi, could you please ask the first question?
Yeah, maybe just a little bit of also introduction how we want to lead this panel. We have some questions from the speakers, and then hopefully we can maybe carve out, I don't know, 10 minutes at the end of the panel for questions that you maybe might have for the speakers. So we start breaking the ice with some questions from the speakers, and then introducing the various elements and arguments that has been also touched base this morning. But then again, maybe if we have some time at the end of the panel, good also to get from feedback, comments, or maybe questions. So I would like to pick up the first question for Ion Codescu, if it's possible, and I'm happy to having you here, and the fact that you mentioned that you are working on this important program regarding, also touching base on geology. So my question is, how can geology mitigate the effects of climate change with particular emphasis on the use of adaptive water resources? So it's a question of planning, making more resilient the territories. How geology, do you think, can give the contribution for making a more resilient territory in your experience? Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question. I think it all starts with having a good understanding of what's underneath us, what we are standing for. And when we are taking a look at the soil, soil is one of the last media environment on which we do not have regulation, and we don't want to have regulation for the sake of it. But we need to. It's the support of all our activities, and we need to know it better. And well, as far as we define soil, it goes to the bedrock. Forest geology, I think, goes much deeper into that, but we share the same purpose: understanding what is underneath, what is happening. We see a lot of impact now from the climate change. We see flooding. We see also impacts from droughts affecting soil and so on. We have underground water as well, which is affected by lack of precipitations or precipitation. So I think that the geology could play a key role and allowing us to understand not only what is in the soil, which is the purpose of what we put in place, but also what is happening beneath that. And yeah, we are very much looking at your expertise to help us with that. Maybe an additional point on that. I think one particular spatial chapter in this intervention that we are thinking about and that we proposed is about contaminated sites. And we estimate that we have about 2 million, so close to 3 million contaminated sites. These are industrial sites, some from even from the Second World War or before that. And we have contamination, so heavy pollution there, various substances from the industrialization, which went even into the bedrock, so deeper than the soil. We also need the expertise of the geologists on these issues, on how to depollute, how to work towards that.
Thank you very much, Ian. And then just to close a little bit of this kind of reflection, do you think that in the working groups where you are working on this kind of matter, is time maybe to introduce the figure of geoscientists into the directives that, by law, it's needed to have, the contribution of geologists into that kind of planning, understanding, again, as you said, contamination, water scarcity, resource of water is the blue oil for the future, right? So it's water, we will need more water in the future, so how we can protect. So as we all are convinced about the importance of geology, how we can link our profession into the directive, and so being really considerate, that is one of our things we have in our mind, we want to be considerate. Thank you.
Well, it's a good point. On the other hand, in the Commission we are guided by these principles of proportionality, so we do not regulate more than it's really needed, and we have strong requests also from this House on this point. So normally we try to focus as much as possible on the substance, and only as much as it's necessary on who does what. But I think what you're mentioning, so the role of the geologist, could be tackled into the implementing part. We already have set up an expert group to deal with these issues, so I think we could invite you there to work together.
Thank you very much. Pavlos, turn to you.
Definitely looking forward for that invitation. We will very much looking forward to support. I believe also that Monica Souza would like also to express her opinion on the same question that you, Rudi, expressed.
Yes. So I think we have talked earlier in the morning, and also the previous colleague talked about understanding standing our ground, understanding our soil. So our object, that is Earth. And so this is really important. We have talked about in the morning how geology can solve many of the current issues that we are facing: climate change, natural hazards, water scarcity, soil pollution. So we really need to be more present and show how geology and geologists can have a concrete role in this problem. So one of the things that also, and I think it wasn't mentioned, is that there is a new EU nature restoration law that has been put in place in August, and in this resolution there is, of course, mentioned the biodiversity, the need to the restoration of the ecosystems, but it's never referred geodiversity, and geodiversity is really the base of everything. So I think in this specific law, it should have been, or it can be added, that the role of geodiversity, and of course then the role of geology and geologists who will implement the science, and also one of the things that we already talked about is education. And a way to reach people is through geocommunication and also geoconservation. So if we have a strategy to preserve specific sites that show us our past, the evolution of the Earth, we can then make them understand why certain issues are important. And so in this nature restoration law, we should have also a strategy for geoconservation, and to show us how we can use the current knowledge, the past knowledge of our paleo record to tackle the problems that we face today and in the future.
Yeah, thank you very much for your position. I think the upcoming directive on soil health monitoring, it would be very much important and complemented by the environmental crime directive and also the environmental liability. And there will be the case, I believe, where geologists with the conceptual understanding of how the earth works, there will be very much in need for their services. Rudi, would you like to continue with your questions?
Yeah, maybe for Natasha, getting maybe a UK point of view. So yeah, I think we continue to discuss about what geologists can do. I think what I would like to ask you is, what can collaboration between geologists and policymakers, considering your experience, be strengthened to address the social environmental risks, considering, again, territorial risks, and how the policymaker can be listened, let's say, by ourselves, and we can contribute, to give them ideas on how to better, let's say, plan the risks in the territory?
Thanks, Rudi. Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and the way in which I think scientists interact with policymakers obviously varies depending on where you are. We're in the European Parliament, but the way that the European Parliament works is very different to each of the member states, and externally and internationally as well. So from our perspective, having been involved in the European Parliament and now not we work on the basis of science for policy rather than policy for science, so less about the regulation of things so that we have to interpret that into what we're doing every day, but more about providing scientific evidence to policymakers so that they can be making the best possible decisions that make our jobs easier, so sort of turning it around on its head. So one of the things that we're doing is actually spending a lot of time in the two houses in the UK, but also with international partners, and making sure that where there is a question of something that's in the public consciousness, we're talking about it before it gets into the houses, before it gets to policymakers. And I think, coming back to Monica's point on education, we speak about education being really important, but it's not just the most formal channels. It's not just about in schools, it's not just about in colleges, universities. When we talk about education, we're really talking about communication and sort of literacy across the population. So not just kids, not just their teachers, but the careers advisors, the parents, the other adults in their lives that have an influence on the decision making. So, you know, the kid comes home from school and says, oh, we did this really cool lesson today, we learned about geosciences, we learned about the rock cycle. If they don't have someone to sort of nurture that and encourage that, it can get lost very quickly. So being able to influence policymakers by having conversations about things that matter to individual people from, you know, a very young age all the way through can be really, really powerful. So we run a lot of events. We have an all-party parliamentary group on science and technology in the House of Lords and the House of Commons. And we do an event every year for school kids where we invite hundreds of school kids in. They get to come to the Houses of Parliament. They get to speak to the policymakers. They have a challenge, a topic that's of interest to them every year. And we find that, you know, policymakers enjoy that kind of thing. It's a good photo opportunity to be, you know, surrounded by the next generation. You know, if you're trying to get re-elected, that's really important. But you know, it's actually more engaging conversation because nobody has to be an expert. You know, people are talking about what they're interested in and how they feel about something. And so many of the geoscience topics that we're talking about today with the laws, the regulation, they're things that have like a human response. That sort of societal impact is really important not to underestimate. So working across subject disciplines, it's not just geoscientists that have responsibility for the Sustainable Development Goals, but those existing and those being promoted, I think internationally, has really increased sort of awareness and literacy of that across the board. People can get on board with things when they see it having an impact on them. So it doesn't have to be everything, it can be those smaller moments as well. And having those conversations in the right places at the right stage sort of demystifies that process and makes it more accessible. A kid will remember going to the Houses of Parliament and they'll remember that they can have those conversations, and you know that might lead to later decisions in life that say, okay, actually, you know, it is something that's, you know, something I could achieve. It's not an insurmountable challenge that, you know, these governments are super important people and everyone's making these decisions and I can't get involved. Your opinions matter, I think, on that individual level.
No, thank you very much. But what do you think are, anyway, the obstacles you have seen in communicating with the policymakers? Because I know that you represent a big, you know, organization, GSL, more than 15,000 geologists, you know, in the UK. So it's really important. It's a pretty significant, let's say, organization. And you described, you know, with the events that you had, you mean there is, I mean, fluid communications, but anyway, I imagine there are obstacles, right, to be listened from the policymakers. Is it because we are more practical and then they are more theoretical in taking care about the matters, or is because maybe we are not so effective in communicate ourselves and they don't understand maybe exactly what we want to do? So what are the obstacles that you have seen?
I think it's a bit of both of those things actually, and I think they both have a part to play. So one of the biggest obstacles I think is that geoscience, and I'm consciously using the word geoscience rather than geology, because I think geology, certainly in the UK, and we have 12,000 fellows globally rather than 15,000 just in the UK, just to correct the record. But I think we find in the UK that geology has almost a dirty reputation. Everybody thinks they know what geology is. It's the extractive industries, it's oil and gas, it's mining. It's the thing that's caused climate change. It's the thing that's dirty, and particularly the younger generation don't necessarily want to be associated with that. They're more interested in climate change, societal impacts, talking to the SDGs. So one of the challenges we have, I think, is that perception. And historically, I don't think geoscientists have been very good at communicating the relevance of what we do to be able to mitigate some of those impacts. You know, we had an industrial revolution, everyone was really glad at the advances that gave us as the human race, but we didn't necessarily worry about the impacts of that until it was almost too late. Yeah. So the biggest challenge, I think, is that perception. You know, you might not get policymakers engaging with something because they think, oh, well, I know what geology is, I know what geosciences is, those people are the ones that cause the problem, and actually getting them to the table in the first place can be the problem.
Yeah.
Look at the room we have here, there's so many geoscientists in this room, we all know these things already, we're all talking, about the same things at the same time. The people who aren't in the room are the ones we need to be talking to, and they're the ones that we need to get more engaged, and that's probably the biggest challenge.
Thank you very much, Natasha. Over to you, Pavlos.
Yes, so I think we have already asked some questions, and perhaps we could step back a bit and try to synthesize. And I would like to ask Professor Maniatis to provide this framework sort of on what you have already heard.
Now, first of all, thanks for the invitation. I have the misfortune being both academic guy and politician, so I cannot escape from there is no way out for me. Let me just say a few things according to mainly my political experience. It was many years ago, back in 2010, 2011, when I was minister of the Ministry of Environment, Energy and Climate Change in Greece, when I was trying to convince the Greek bureaucracy as well as the European, here in Brussels, bureaucracy, that there cannot be any green transition or digital transition without raw materials. There was a sense that God would send us all the raw materials, someone will make the final products, and we just start using smartphones, computers, photovoltaics, wind parks, etc. This is my first comment. I'm happy to say that now, at the end, Europe has understood the importance of raw materials. And this is why, for example, we have started discussing at the European Parliament issues like clean industrial deal. Second comment, the strategic target of Europe now and for the future is or should be strategic independence. Not only energy independence, but strategic independence. To become a powerful international for stability and peace, etc., anchor of humanity. There is no strategic independence without raw materials independence. There are various ways to be provided on raw materials. You can buy, you can lend, you can use your own raw materials, but in any case, you cannot ignore reality, which is you need raw materials. And my first comment is that there cannot be any green development, sustainability, whatever we're talking about, all these nice things, without the participation of the community, without the participation of local communities. When we are trying to improve, to develop an investment, a green investment, a wind park, if we do not achieve to have a local society as an ally to our attempt, we will fail. In any case, it has not become yet, it has not become a reality for the guys who are taking decisions or for the private sector who is trying to do the private investment. So I think to summarize, we have 2 or 3 main issues to discuss, and I hope we will discuss them in the coming, in the existing term in the European Parliament. First of all, how we'll go to climate action. There is no discussion that we will go towards this direction. whatever happens. With neutrality, but the target is concrete. We have REPowerEU, we have Green Deal, etc. On the other side, we have all these negative international tensions and negative instances. Second issue, the issue of natural hazards. We must say that we are not well prepared for natural hazards. Neither politicians, nor the administration, and nor the society. We must understand that we are living in a new era, which comes extremely quickly, more than our various models have predicted. But now here we are. 1 year ago we had a disaster in Greece. Recently we had another disaster in Spain. We must see how we'll speed up our and finally the issue of environmental protection. We all understand that we need to protect our environment. But we cannot protect our environment with no participation, as I already said, of the local communities. On the other side, we must be responsible that also, in order to have environmental protection, you have to look at other countries, overseas, where you must examine whether the various environmental laws, etc., are in operation or not. Because you cannot have green transition in Europe, taking raw materials from Africa, where children are working, or where environmental rules are not working. This, I think that these principles, we all know all this, but let's have all this always in mind, because now, during this term we will pass, we have an arsenal, a legislative arsenal for green transition. What I wait for the coming 5 years from the European Parliament, the European Council, the new European Commission is to apply this legislation, and it is the difficult issue. And here is where scientists like geologists can help. We need your help. You ought to help us, because without having the politicians, the decision makers, governors, ministers, mayors, etc., without having reliable information, reliable data, we cannot take useful information, useful decisions for our societies. This is why I feel, honestly talking, happy being here with you.
Are you sure that you're not a geologist?
No, I'm a rural surveyor, but my diploma thesis 3 decades ago was on raw materials of a concrete district in Greece. So I feel a member of your family.
I think you understand very well all of our thesis, and it's very good that you synthesize it and you touch upon many things that all this discussion is all about. Many things. You touch also about the social acceptance to operate, which is super important, and thank you for that. But also you paved the way quite well for my next question, which is actually on the critical raw materials. And I will ask Ian and Monica to prepare their answers. The question really is on, in the context of the Critical Raw Materials Act, how we geologists can help ensure a secure and sustainable supply of essential minerals, promoting EU independence, this is what Professor Maniatis just touched upon, while minimizing environmental impacts and gaining social acceptance. So pretty much you paved the way for, rightly so, for the next question. So Ian, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for this. Well, I can easily pick up where Mr. Maniatis left it. I think we all agree. There are various angles that we need to take into account for whatever activity we want to do or not. There's also inaction, as it's known impacts and costs. And of course, I'm coming from a department in the European Commission in charge with protection of the environment primarily. But this doesn't mean, and I would underline it, that we are against other activities. We are very conscious of the fact that we need activities, we need mining. So what we are putting in place doesn't say, don't mine. It's not an issue of whether or not you mine. More like, when you mine, how would you do it in order to take into account the environmental protection? Well, in the soil, the initiative that I just mentioned, there is no issue, because we had questions and discussions with the mining industry saying, would an objective of having healthy soils by 2050, let's say, would prevent us from undergoing mining? And the reply, it is no. But when you do so, what's the requirement there that we propose is that you reflect whether, for example, the environmental impacts have been taken into account. For example, instead of having a footprint of, 10 hectares, maybe this can be done in 7 hectares. If the conclusion is, well, no, we assessed, and it should be 10 hectares, the surface of the project, there you go. This reflection should be there. So this is a way of taking it into account, just to make it more practical. And to reply to your question, also on the role of the geologists, we know that the geological layers are not always the same, so the situation is not the same. Sometimes they provide, for example, a natural insulation, sometimes not. And that's critical information when you do activities such as mining. It's only the geologists that can give this reply. So that's why we need to be involved in these activities. And again, I fully agree, and that's a critical issue. When we do this kind of activities or not, refrain from doing this, I think we need all of us, irrespective of the site where we are focused and working on, take into account the economical needs and impacts as well. Also the environmental impacts, but also very importantly, the social ones. Indeed, and well, by taking into account and explaining also to the public, for example, well, I need to do mining here, but we have, taken into account the impacts, the water which is underground is protected and so on. This ensures that the local population can accept those projects. If you don't take them into account and you're not able to explain them properly, then there is an issue with acceptance of that project. Because of course nobody would like to live near something which is very polluting and so on. And of course, as I said, the geologists can play a key role. So they are scientists at the end of the day, so it's extremely important and should be at the basis of the decision making.
Thank you very much for that. Monica, what will be your position on the same question?
Thank you, Pavlos. And from a geologist perspective, I don't know if you all know the Big Bang Theory and Sheldon, and he hated geology, although he one time slept with a book of geology in his arms. But he said that geologists are the dirt people. And I think earlier this morning, someone talked about how people perceive geologists are somewhat dirty or related to dirt because of pollution in the past regarding mining, for instance. And of course, nowadays, this is not like this, at least in Europe. We have legislation. And someone said also earlier that geologists are in the beginning of the supply chain, through the supply chain until the end, the recycling. And so we can help in the various stages of the supply chain. And if you also, in your history lessons, you learned about the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, and we are still in the resources age because we continue to use resources and geological resources. And this is impossible to live without mineral resources. So what we need to do is to map to do a thorough geological mapping throughout Europe, and geological surveys have here an important role in this task. For instance, in Portugal, some parts of our country are still not mapped conveniently, and not knowing our grounds, our geological backgrounds, we cannot deliver anything. So we need to know our lands. We need to know the geology of each of the European country. We need to know our resources, and then we can make a concrete plan to address this ecological transition as we want. And so I would start, of course, mapping is the first thing that we need to do. Geologists need to be in the several stages, as I said, in the supply chain. We have many opportunities in the recycling of materials that were not used or are available and can be incorporated again in the supply chain. And we need to invest in research and innovation to go find those resources that are still not economically available, but they exist, and only with new technology we can go and find it, or also in the recycling part. And so geologists also have an important role in an active mining to address the environmental impacts. So it can't be a mining activity without a strict control of the environmental impact, because there is impact. It's not something that we can not. There is, of course, environmental impact, but we can mitigate this impact with the help of geologists, of course, and other professionals. And of course, geologists have also an important role in the restoration of ancient mines that, of course, in the past there were no legislation, environmental legislation, or preoccupation about the impact of this activity. And we have the knowledge to help to improve and remediate the environment. So we are all over the supply chain, so but we need to start from the beginning, mapping. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Indeed, the challenges that we face as a society are multidisciplinary, and geologists alone, as you correctly mentioned, cannot work on their own. We need to be part of a larger team with other disciplines as part of the scientific way of addressing all those problems. The next question will be for Professor Maniatis and Natasha. So the question is, how can geologists be helpful in developing effective policies for managing coastal erosion and rising sea levels, particularly in vulnerable coastal communities? So Professor Maniatis, if I can have your opinion on this matter.
Thanks for the question. Coastal zones, the most sensitive zones of our planet, coastal zones. So, in order to start discussing about coastal zones, first of all, we must recognize the importance of coastal and marine geology, something concrete. Second issue is that we must understand also that geology can play a pivotal role in this new issue of green transition, which is offshore wind parks. Offshore wind parks will be the new explosion of investments, because we know that it is there where green transition will go, besides batteries, green hydrogen, etc., etc. So, seabed geology and subsurface geology are extremely important in coastal zones. If we want to summarize the usefulness of a geologist in these issues, we can say that a geologist can conduct thorough assessment of impacts due to erosion and the rise of sea level. Second, to collect the necessary data for holistic coastal management and strategies for a viable, sustainable development in islands and in coastal areas. Third issue is to predict the impact of rising sea level and coastal erosion, and maybe a geologist can help to improve nature-based solutions, not only human-based solutions. And finally, an issue that we have not yet started to discuss in our meetings. In other meetings it is discussed, but in our meetings it's the financial burden due to disasters. If you see some diagrams on the evolution of the burden, the financial burden due to natural disasters, you will see that we're talking about hundreds of billions, which means that since all this insurance approach due to natural hazards has to be managed in one or in another way, a geologist can play a critical role to this direction, and we all know that coastal areas, being the most sensitive ones, are extremely, have a priority for these studies. And now I'm coming from a Mediterranean country, so we all know that Mediterranean is one of the more sensitive areas in our planet. So we especially north of, south of Europe has to do something as soon as possible to this direction.
Can I have your, no, it's Natasha, sorry. So can I have your position on that matter? But could you please stay within 2 minutes in the interest of time so I can ask Maria the next question? Thank you.
Sure. So, along with lots of our colleagues here, you know, the UK is a collection of lots of islands, so we have lots of coastlines which are subject to lots of different challenges, I think. And I think in terms of geoscience solutions, we talk about things in terms of mitigation, adaptation, which can include nature-based solutions along with engineering and technological advances and innovation, but also remediation. And I think where geoscientists have a really key role to play is bringing together different expert communities, because it's not just geosciences. You know, along with a lot of what we do, that interdisciplinarity is really important. So there's a huge body of research going on by our colleagues in marine sciences, marine biology and engineering, by ecologists. Maureen mentioned earlier that geoscience is so far removed from ecology, and I would argue perhaps that isn't always the case. You know, there's a lot of overlap between those things. So making sure that you have the right people in the room so that you can bring together expertise, because one person's problem is another person's opportunity, and that goes across the different scientific disciplines as well. So, you know, nature-based solutions for coastal adaptation are important, but that doesn't necessarily address all of the human social impact that you want to address. And there's also a level of risk involved in some of these things as well. The finances, I know that's a later question that we may get to, but you know, insurers will worry about the mitigations after the fact, and they'll remediate an issue rather than trying to prevent it. So I think geoscientists have a role in trying to use data that we already have from geological mapping, digital data sets, historical trends and data, and bringing that into the 21st century with the science and the modelling that we have now as capability, and trying to influence future decision making so that we can prevent rather than remediate afterwards.
Thank you very much. The next question will be for Maria and you, and slightly more important than the other one. once, quite sensitive issue. How can geology mitigate the effects of climate change with particular emphasis on the use of adaptive water resources? This subject can create local and national conflicts given the exacerbated influence that it happens under the climate change. Maria, the floor is yours.
Pavlos, thank you for the question. Geology can play a vital role in mitigating the effects of climate change through rational management of water resources. This is particularly important as climate change worsens water scarcity, causes droughts, and increases the competition of water that could lead to conflicts between and within countries. By understanding groundwater water bodies, enhance aquifer recharge, and supporting sustainable water practices, geologists can contribute to proper water management. Today, we know that water scarcity is a result of the prolonged droughts of recent years, along with the dramatic increase of water demand for two primary actions, which is irrigation and urban consumption. Geologists can prepare proposals for immediate and long-term actions of strategic water management to protect groundwater, as well as taking measures to address water scarcity. These actions, of course, has to be the implementation of the measurements of the River Basin Management Plan in line with the directive, Framework Directive of Water 2016. Of course, we have to have efficient management of irrigation, which should be prioritized because the consumption is to 800% of the groundwater, and this can be effective if we monitoring and improve all water distribution for irrigation and all the networks. Of course, we should monitoring all the groundwater abstraction for irrigation. Desalination is one of the measurements that should be done for water supply, especially in islands and in places with water demand for tourist reason. Also, water management, we should have flood reduction dams that can be used for two reasons. One is for flood protection, and the second one is for recharge aquifers. And of course, we should have artificial recharge programs for aquifers. Raising public awareness also is very crucial for water management, and this is something that the governments should deal with laws. And we all understand that all these measurements should be combined with policies. If we don't have policy for water management, we cannot be effective for any of measurements. Of course, we have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We have to protect natural resources. We have to be adapted to climate change impacts, for example, with water management plans. And of course, we have to have international cooperation, such as climate agreements, and to promote clean technologies. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So Ian, if you can have also your position on that. And then also there's an important question again for you, and I think that will be the round of questions, and then we can, if we have time, we can sort of have each other. So,
on the issue of water, yeah, it's extremely important. It's also very high on the agenda of the Commission. We look at this as water resilience. As Maria mentioned earlier, unlike for soil where we don't have protection rules at field level for water, we do have. And we have 3 parameters there which are very important, in which we all are interested to have, water quality, so that the water is that we are drinking or using is wholesome, and this is covered well, I would say, by the current rules. But then we have more and more an issue of water scarcity, but also excess of water because of various events that unfortunately we have witnessed very recently in Spain. And this is exacerbated by the climate change. We are hit more and more, and I think the existing rules do not protect us. Of course, it's not always about rules. It's also about how we are thinking about it. I think Natasha was mentioning earlier, prevention is important. Being prepared to deal with that is extremely important. Water is, of course, very much connected to the geology. Water is in the ground, underground, and so on. So when we have excess of water, of course, these reservoirs are extremely important. We are looking at soil. We are saying, for example, that the healthy soil can take in a lot of water and, for example, prevent flooding, which is not the case for lands which are very dry. Of course, we have also the issue of underground water. Sometimes we are extracting a lot for very good reasons. But again, this may link to impact on availability of water for various activities and the difficulty to replenish these aquifers. So knowing where these reservoirs are, what it is around, how they are impacted is extremely important. And geology has an extremely important role to play. I think we can expand a lot. There are a lot of solutions there, but of course we also need your knowledge on this.
Okay, thank you. Just one very final quick question for you. Let's try to bring together, because we touched upon water. You spoke also about contaminated land, but also the financing perspective of this. So the final question is, how does the EU taxonomy ensure that companies are held accountable for long-term environmental impacts, particularly regarding water use and land contamination?
Of course, we have a clear principle that sometimes we have difficulties in applying it, and that's polluter pays. And sometimes we have historical issues. Sometimes polluter is no longer there, which happened before having the rules in place. Sometimes we have difficulties in enforcing them. But everything starts with knowledge. Being aware of what's the baseline there before a certain activity. That's why we are insisting on monitoring water, or monitoring soil as well. And then having, as we say here in Belgium, an état des lieux, so a state of play of the situation after the activity. And then you can draw the line. Of course, there are rules to be applied there. Of course, there is knowledge which is must, which is very much needed. As we say always, and that's also an important point, we have various EU funds which can be tapped into that, even for cleaning the land and so on. Sometimes even when there is a polluter, we no longer be able to find it, because human health is extremely important, so we need to put this in place. But we should be aware that EU funds, with all the might of the EU funds, but also national funds, so the public funds are not sufficient. So we also need to draw on what's in the public sector. And I think a couple of you mentioned this, insurers. I think they are, insurance companies are more and more interested of how to deal with the impacts of the various events we have, how to ensure stability. And for that, they also need knowledge. So that's also, I think, a pathway that you will maybe should explore.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. This basically concludes this discussion that we had. I don't know if Rudi would
Yeah,
like to coordinate some
Yeah.
sort of final comments. from
Yeah,
our
just one
speakers.
thing and another very quick question, stealing 2-3 minutes of the next. Marco has also a question. Very briefly. First thing, let's congratulate with Maria Zima, who is the new president of AGG. We didn't say anything, but really big effort. Congratulations to you. And for Ion and also Yanis, we had a lot of directives on water, on many things. We don't have any directives along landslides, right? And even though the landslides maybe is a problem only for the Mediterranean countries like Italy, Greece, Spain, maybe Portugal as well, but is an issue, is a risk, really. I mean, it's a natural hazard. So I think it's just a point for you. You don't need to reply, but we need to think also having a directive like that. So, and then Marco has a question.
Yeah, Marco?
Thanks. Actually, I don't
Can you
have...
actually present yourself?
Yes.
Just so we know?
Marko Komac, Slovenian Geological Society. Thank you very much for this interesting roundtable. I don't have a question. I have a rather recommendation to the European Parliament. We see dangerous changes in perception of climate change around the world, especially towards the west of Atlantic, where sudden denial of climate changes appear. What European Union and Parliament and Commission should be careful about is to include the scientific grounds behind the decisions to actually prove the existence of climate changes and that we need to tackle them, because generally people are prone to easier explanation and social media false news, and here Europe, I think, plays a crucial role to stay on the scientific part of the truth and the history. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, please.
Yes, I'm Nuno da Silva, so representing Belgium and Luxembourg Geological Association. So just a remark, very high level. This roundtable was about climate change and environment. So as several people mentioned previously here, there is a kind of a contradiction in between the perception of the public, for example, for geology, mining, quarrying, etc. And on the other side, there is people are keen to protect environment. And I think this is really a difficult equation to resolve, I think, because we don't have just to convince the public, but we have also to convince politicians, EU Commission, for example, because this is the starting point. If they are not convinced, so we have to find, and I think it's really not easy, we have to find a kind of clear communication which conciles the environmental protection and the need for some kind of sustainability about jobs, about having raw materials available, not being dependent from other regions in the world, etc. So I think it's really a difficult one, and this could be something we could maybe try to help to build up, because it's not just a geologist issue, obviously. So that's the really difficult one, to try to, to have a good communication for everyone, because the reality is that one. It's that one. Nobody wants to have a mine close by home. It used to be the wastes. In the past, 20 years ago, everybody is producing waste, but nobody wants to have a landfill close by. But now we see the same kind of discussions about turbines, wind turbines, for example, which is a completely different story. We all agree. But so there is really very difficult work to be done there, and a clear communication to be found, because we are all on the same boat, in a way, and we all want to have a nice environment, but we want to have jobs, we want to have raw materials, etc. Thank you.
Okay, Thank you very much. Any other comment? Oh,
Yeah.
Yes, yes, Professor, yes, please.
To my experience, there are two things we can do to this direction. First one, to establish a local observatory of the mining or whatever activities, with the participation of representatives, scientists, representatives of the local community. Local communities are suspicious to all of us, scientists, politicians, investors, to everybody. So if we manage for the society to have an eye on the investment, it will solve a small part of the problem, but it will be a part, even if it's small. The second, my experience, is to ask ourselves, what are we giving to the local society in order to coexist with the investment? What do we give? The investor gives nothing, some working positions. The state gives nothing, because all the tax due to the mining process go somewhere outside the local society. So my second proposal would be a part, a big part of the taxes collected by the ministries of economy, etc., not to go into the central budgetarian codes, but 40%, 50%, 6% of this tax to be invested in environmental and development projects in the local society, in order to have local jobs and to have concrete benefits as money. Where is the investor taking money? Where is the state taking money and the local citizen takes nothing? I think now this is what we can call inclusiveness or whatever. But in any case, we will not solve the problem of NIMBY, not in my backyard. Neither in mine, nor in wind parks, neither ever. Society, everybody does not want in his backyard something. But we can minimize or decrease the negative reactions, and always open public discussion, debate, and convince the local society. Not somebody in four walls sign an agreement and a decision, and then the local societies are in front of a page. Someone has taken decision for their lives outside of them, without asking them. So, participation of local society, participation in debate, in discussion, open, public, with benefits, concrete economic benefits, and on the other side, to have an eye on the scientific observatory on its investment.
Peter, I think you want to position yourself as well.
Yeah, maybe in 20 seconds. So, because yeah, I know the time is advanced, but just to reply to your questions very quickly. Well, now we have the conference and the question, okay, what afterwards? My suggestions would be that I mentioned expert groups already. Our attention span and the time is very limited. I think we are all very busy people. So the question is what you could also put on the table. Participation in our expert groups, for example, if we had one on soil, would be very much appreciated. There we don't try to prescribe the measures, how to improve various soil features and so on. But you mentioned landslides. It can be connected very well to the soil erosion. That is very prominent in our proposal. I don't think we need necessarily a distinct legislation on that, but we need to listen to you, to your proposal, how we can improve this from the perspective
have to conclude. I know that you have a lot of questions, which is great, but unfortunately, out of respect for the next session, we will have to conclude here. And I will thank all the speakers, all the panelists, that they provide their opinion. This was a very successful meeting, I think. We discussed and we touched up on many things. So many thanks for that. Many thanks for your patience. And I do apologize in advance for the next session because we took some time from them. Thank you.
So we invite the next panel and the coordinator of the next panel and the speakers come to the stage.